3, 2, 1, and we're live.
Yo,
Damn, son, where'd you find this?
Oh wait, no, this one. There we go. This is the classic intro.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen,
to the Eigenbros. Yeah. Thank you for
Indeed.
joining us again. If you
and guys, make sure to subscribe to our channel and also follow us on Twitter at Eigenbros. Today we're joined with special guest Joseph once again.
Yes.
And Joe also has a podcast called Beyond the Physics. So you can find him on Apple,
Right.
Spotify,
Right.
Google Play,
Yep.
all that good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And also make sure you guys follow his Twitter, which is coming up. I think, what is it right now, Joe?
Well, Beyond the Physics, but the at is Beyond the Physics.
Okay.
Physic.
The
Yeah.
Physic.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, guys, make sure you follow him on Twitter. Me and Juan both did an interview with him, and he kind of explores the more personal side of the Eigenbros. So you might see us cry.
Right. A lot of tears. A lot of tears on that one. But yeah, thanks again, Joe, for coming, man.
Yeah,
This
thanks
is,
for having
you're kind of like our repeat guest.
At this
Oh,
point,
yeah.
At this point, yeah, you're the most like.
He's pretty much like a third Eigenbro at this point.
Yeah.
yeah. I am
So-
the official Eric Weinstein.
Yeah. For sure.
Exactly.
Yeah. No. Speaking of actually, Eric Weinstein, he went on Joe's podcast
Joe Rogan.
recently.
Yes,
Yeah.
other Joe.
Yeah, Joe Rogan. Not this Joe.
I was gonna say we should be famous.
I'll have him on my podcast if he wants to be on.
Dude, I don't doubt that he would, because he seems like, I mean, just watching a little bit of or kind of listening through the interview with Rogan, he seemed like he had problems with like the way institution, like he felt like an outsider,
Yeah.
right? And I'm not sure if that's something you kind of wanted to touch upon.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could. So just for the audience out there, my podcast, Beyond the Physics,
Yeah.
the whole premise is that I kind of pick up on a lot of cultural issues within the sciences, particularly physics, because that's my background, right?
Mhm.
And so basically, there's this kind of toxic mentality, in my estimation, that it's very performance-based, right? And it's not as objective as people would claim it is in terms of how we're going about measuring people's success in the field, like using the physics GRE and stuff like that. And so all the details are on my podcast, but basically it's just trying to address this notion of who deserves to be a physicist.
Yeah.
Now, Joe, did you do a new episode about this on your podcast?
I have an introduction that came out before your episode, and there I kind of describe all of the motivations and stuff like that.
Okay.
And so Eric's experience sounds like he would be a good guest to have,
Right.
Yeah.
because he experienced a lot of difficulties, exactly like with his advisor, and like perhaps like difficulties
The
obtaining his
department.
PhD and stuff like that.
Yeah.
A lot of this type of drama is not unusual for me to see,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah, I think all three of us have,
right.
maybe not necessarily experienced, but
We've heard things.
Yeah, we've been around
seen-
situations.
Yeah.
Right. Which are his situation when he was talking about it didn't like shock me.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, this sounds like something
Yeah.
that academic department would do.
Yeah, he seems like the first person to really first big figure to really come out and say something, because usually the people that you see in the limelight are the people who've gone through the system and fit into that box, right? They successfully have jumped through all those barriers, so to say, or gone through those thresholds, or obstacles that a lot of the administrative kind of thing puts in some people's way. And he even says that he's not really an orthodox kind of person, because he came into math not really being great at it.
Yeah.
He was like, I was just an average student. I suffer in processing, that kind of thing.
You know, I feel like all three of us can probably relate to that. What do you think?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I'm B average at math also. And
Yeah, same
I'm more
here.
like D average in math. I was like, shit. I think I'm even worse than that.
No, it's because you like to build you like to reinvent the wheel every time.
That's kind of true. That's kind of true.
You're just like, fuck it. I'm just gonna do it again.
I try to get out of that habit as much as I can, but yeah, you're right.
Which is tough. Like if you were given a lot, but that doesn't mean you're not an intelligent person. Like that just means that you have a different approach to solving problems. Like, you know, it's and that's kind of fucked up that the system filters out people like that, right? It filters out people that have a different approach to things, even if it's unique to them and it gets things done at the end of the day. Then what's up? Like, you know.
Well, I think the thing with institutions is, as institutions grow, right, they become more and more bogged down with the bureaucracy. And you have to have more metrics of success, essentially. Even if it's like false metrics, right? I mean, we just get all of these metrics and barriers of, barriers to entry, metrics of success, standards, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And then it makes your institution more and more impenetrable to different kinds of thought, because essentially it's building it up to a level where it kind of funnels in the same type of person through the system. The people who can meet those kind of arbitrary metrics that have been set for that particular system. So I feel like this is just something that it seems unavoidable to any kind of institution, because as institutions go through time, ideally they're going to be progressing, right? Whether that's for good or bad, they're just going to become more and more arduous in its ability to actually be a different kind of person who's successful in that regime. So yeah, I think this is just a problem with institutions, and it's going to happen regardless.
I mean, I agree with you in that that's the way it has operated so far, but I think it's our responsibility to try to update that software, right?
I agree.
I see no good argument as to why it has to be that way. And I think there is a good argument to say that we're going to have to change, right? Because basically the future that I envision, that humans are going to have to become much more creative problem solvers, right? Because right now there's the majority of humans doing labor that is going to be automated away anyways, right? So it's like, it's not useful for them to continue down that front. It's time to, I think it's time to have a shift in humanity towards promoting creativity and problem solving. And these are things that aren't incentivized right now. Because right now, because of all these filters of, who comes in, who comes out, you're getting a lot of these rote mechanical thinkers that just know how to solve like one specific type of problem one way. And, I think we're really going to have to shift as a species if we want to flourish.
I agree for sure.
Yeah, and like, just to clarify too, like there's a diversity of like we have typically, we don't fit the mold of most physicists. I mean, scientists as a broad spectrum, I think, like, yeah, we probably do fit into that mold because we're kind of nerds in some aspect, right?
That's a very broad mold.
Yeah, but like in physics, it's a field particularly dominated by guys, for one, and in America, it's typically if your pigmentation is a little bit more light colored, I should say.
Less melanin.
It's a very, very PC way of just saying white.
Well, yeah. Well, you could say, I can say it. No, I'm kidding.
You can say you're Hispanic.
Yeah, no, I'm 50% white, I could say it. But yeah, it's a little bit like you only get, you have only certain one type of culture dominating and thought dominating like how things are done, and I think that's kind of the I think there are certain programs, I won't name a couple because then you can filter out what things are happening, but yeah, it's like there are certain programs that I've heard that try to increase diversity of thought. And I think with that comes a little bit more of, diversity in solving problems, because not everyone is going to have the same approach to things. And some people are going to have more creative approaches and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree. That's why I think kind of especially for like, let's say, underrepresented minorities, I think we're actually in a kind of an advantageous spot right now.
Yeah.
It makes me feel bad a little bit for, people who are not, because we actually have a little tiny bit more, leeway in the sense that we can have more of a diversity of thought if you apply to certain programs, right? Because then you do get some better, let's say, better funding for your education, so that you can actually have less pressure to fit exactly into that mold. Of course, it's still not much, I think if you were maybe to go back in time a little bit, you would still have more of the ability to have more of a diversity of thought, like guys like Einstein, or let's say like what's a good example? Peter Higgs. He famously says how he probably couldn't survive in the academic world of today because he published very few papers. So I think of course it's just it's a problem with time. But the fact that if you're an underrepresented minority, you do get a little bit of extra leeway usually if you have gotten to this level and been able to apply to something that allows you to have funding, not to have to fit into that metric exactly. So I give them a little bit of props, for that.
You're saying moving the how do you say it? Just moving things along a little bit, you're saying? Like, is that what you're
Can you clarify a little bit more?
Well, because what I'm getting from what you're saying is they're moving, some institutions are putting policies in place to kind of increase the visibility of minority students in their programs, right?
Yeah.
And you're saying that's a positive because
usually with that push to bring minorities into your institutions, you will provide them a little bit of extra funding. So because of that, or let's say not even just extra funding, some maybe extra resources. So because of that, it allows you to have a little bit more leeway in having to satisfy those metrics so rigidly. Of course, it's still very rigid, I think.
Yeah.
I guess it also depends on the institution.
Yeah.
But it does give us a little bit of a glimmer of hope.
Right.
But in the future, I think even that's going to be tapped out when, let's say, there's a regular occurrence of minority physics students coming in, then it's just going to get bogged down just like all the rest of the same system. Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I take your point, but I kind of disagree. I mean, I think physics in general is putting an effort towards including minorities, which is laudable, but this issue of the mentality is kind of endemic to the program as a whole. Like I see like the people in these diversity programs experiencing a lot of hardship, and anecdotally, like for instance, I don't know if you guys are up to date, but someone that we know in our program, right, was their advisor basically said, okay, once you go to the PhD program, we're not going to work together anymore. I can't recommend you for any theory group, but I'll recommend you for any experimental group moving forward. And so then the student was like, okay, is there something wrong with my work? And he's like, no. Is there something I should have been doing better? And no, there's no objective criteria that the advisor could provide for them. And right, so then my answer is to like, what is really going on here is that the advisor must have some preconceived notion of what a theorist is, what a smart person is, whatever, and is just too nice of a person to tell them to their face that, you know, I don't think you meet these criteria.
Sure, I could see that for sure.
And so I'm just saying, like, these barriers to entry for diversity students of not fitting this mold, right? I don't think it's necessarily fair, and I don't think it's, you know.
Yeah, I think as a underrepresented minority student, I think we dealt with this all our life, right? And this is going to be like, you're always going to have the problems surrounding your program.
Yeah.
But then it's just the things that they can objectively lock down in your program to maybe give you some leeway.
Yeah.
Will give you at least maybe an even playing field, let's say.
Yeah.
So, but it's I guess it's an even playing field in the scope of the overall. I don't know how you say it. Of the overall picture, I guess.
Yeah.
But you're always going to have problems that you face on the outskirts, right?
Okay, well,
just like
so-
what you named.
Well, no. So the reason I bring this up is because this advisor is part of our program, right? He should be on board with this mission of diversity and increasing diversity of thought, right? But there's this inherent mental model that's kind of pushing against this very notion.
And that doesn't really surprise me, honestly. This is why I also think that it's better for, and I think I have an idea. I'm sure he's probably not an underrepresented minority himself.
No, he is.
Oh, he is?
Yeah.
Okay. So then he's just still buying into that.
There's only
picture.
certain.
Right. So my point
a
is,
theorist looks like this.
yeah, exactly.
You know.
So my point is that this kind of transcends culture to like a whole like what it is to be a physicist, right? I think this is more of an idea of trying to expand that definition of who can be a physicist, right? And promote thinking creatively and not discouraging people for just wanting to solve problems a certain way or whatever, you know.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's always a good thing.
But I think the field also does this where it says if you're not going to be because there are certain theory students that are minorities. I'm not going to say they're not, because in our department there are some particularly a certain group from a certain nation that I won't say. They're particularly well trained to be good theorists, and I think you guys know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And they're beasts, and they're also technically minorities in the U.S. And there's also that, but
they're not seen as minorities in the program
because of their
in
intellect?
physics they're not minorities. It's a
a
minority of the program you're in. So in physics they're not a minority.
Really?
Not minorities. You're right, because they are a significant population of the physics community in the United States.
Oh, okay.
So they don't consider them minority students, which is why you won't see them in a minority physics program, although they're minorities in the U.S.
Yeah.
But they've screwed themselves because they're so good at physics that they are not considered minorities in physics.
Well, I was also talking about this other group subsection of the minority group. I think I know what you're talking about.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah. Like certain nationalities where it's like if you focus on just Hispanic people, there are a certain subset of Hispanic people that are like, come here, come into programs that are, at least in our region of the U.S., but they're very well trained. Their nation, I guess, trained them really well, and they come in here kick ass. And I don't know if they're treated in that same manner, because I see some of them join. Like I see professors trying to recruit them, looking purely at their intellect and not really at their pigmentation or cultural background. They're just like, dude, these kids are smart.
Well, I think because their training is so undeniably better than us.
Yeah.
It's just they're at a level that's way higher than where we're going to come in. It's like if you're so much above the average American student, then it's like it's undeniable, right?
Yeah. But I mean, that's the thing. Like we're minority American students, so we're
fucked.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to say it, but the American system, either you were prepared almost from birth to do this, or you
like a Feynman.
yeah, or all of the really great physicists. I mean, there's some like Edward Witten who didn't necessarily do physics, but he's like a genius. So
but he's always been involved in it.
Yeah, his parents are both physicists.
Yeah, like as a kid he was in physics and stuff, and he's been surrounded by that culture by his parents, like you said.
Yeah.
So he's born. I would consider that's born into it as well.
Physics?
It's the same deal as like Feynman.
Okay.
The big American guys who were physics geniuses were born into it in some fashion, usually.
Yeah. Except maybe Leonard Susskind.
Yeah, and I don't know his background.
Susskind,
he's a bad motherfucker.
His father,
though.
have you know his backstory?
No.
So apparently Suskind's backstory is that we're talking about Leonard Susskind. I think he's retired, right?
No, he's still in the game.
Yeah, he works with GW.
He's like 70 something. He's really
78,
up there.
I believe.
Yeah, he's really up there. But he's an American physicist. He's particularly from the New York area. He grew up in like kind of like a working class kind of family. His father was a plumber, according to what I've heard from him. And yeah, it's he's probably one of the few people that I can think of, unless his father raised him to be a scientist his whole life, which it doesn't sound like he did. He kind of just learned along the way, but he said that his father was a smart guy and on all this other stuff. But nonetheless, but he's like few and far between. You know, he's like one of the rare American physicists. I can barely think of any of those kind of people that kind of really excel or come to that level
without growing up in it.
Yeah.
I think it's very few.
Yeah, and I don't know but this speaks something to maybe the culture of science in America, right? We're not developing our STEM to the level that, I mean, right now they might be putting things in place because everybody's been like saying, dude, we suck at STEM. We need to do something about it. And I mean, let's be real. A lot of the country, you know, isn't homogenous. There are variations in groups, and you know, we have to teach to these different groups. We can't just like say, fuck it, they don't get STEM. This particular group doesn't understand math or something, you know, which is ridiculous, right? Which it feels like that, at least for me, in my sort of upbringing. My math wasn't really that strongly encouraged. I was always really good at literature and reading. That was more enforced because I think it's typically seen as easier to teach, you know? And I think that's like taking the path of least resistance. A lot of the public schools, I think they kind of take for granted that students aren't going to do well at math.
Right.
And to do well at math here, you need like a tutor or something, you know, or you need to go to a great school that has really great math teachers or something.
Yeah. I think that's generally the trend. You're going to say, Joe?
Yeah, can I jump in? I mean,
yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so I mean, it's just, I think this has to do with promoting. Again, it has to do with the mindset in science. Like, looking to physics, a lot of times our peers seem to say something like, teaching is kind of like a waste of time. Like, you should devote your effort towards research. And so to me, that seems like kind of an egotistical thing to say, and that like, oh, my brain is worth more than, you know, if you were to educate and uplift like 20 more brains strictly by a numbers thing, like you would think that education should be a worthwhile endeavor, right?
Yeah.
And so I think this mentality of kind of like egotism and thinking that physicists, I think, kind of have a big ego, and I think the culture kind of promotes that, you know, in thinking that we're like the smartest, the greatest, or whatever, and maybe there's like a selection bias there to like promote those types of people to get into physics. Yeah. But anyway, so I think in general, if we want to fix that type of thing, we need to try to create incentives for really experts in the field to pursue education and see it as worthwhile in the first place.
Yeah. So I agree. I think we should talk a little bit about Eric Weinstein. So there was one, just to switch gears, there was one thing that I wanted to discuss real quick about, I thought, let me see, what was the name of the clip? On YouTube, there's a clip called It's Time to Leave This Planet. Eric Weinstein, it's on the Joe Rogan podcast. He discusses a really important phenomenon that me and Juan, we've discussed this when we first met each other a few times. I didn't put it as elegantly as Weinstein did.
Sure. I did.
But it was one of these things that we definitely talked about. So he talks about how humans as a civilization were really far in intelligence, but we're lacking wisdom. And there is a problem there because I think he called it the twin nuclei problem or something. Mm-hmm. You know, the fact that we've split the atom with the atomic bomb, and then with the double helix. I don't know how that has anything to do with nuclei, but I guess because DNA is in the nucleus.
I think we're learning. Maybe we're learning how our own genetic. We're going down the road of manipulating our genome.
Yeah, and I guess that's like on the order of nuclei, the cell nucleus.
Yeah.
So he said, "We have the power of gods," and he had a nice quote there. He said, "We are gods, but for the wisdom," and I thought that was perfectly summed up. And it's this thing that I've always kind of been thinking about. How do we increase our wisdom as a species, or can we increase our wisdom as a species? Because I think we're at a crossroads. We have such a level of power, but I don't think we have the ability to be able to handle it.
Right. So then I think it's probably useful to define what you mean by wisdom then.
So wisdom is what you have through experience. So the separator between intelligence and wisdom is experience. It actually kind of, I was thinking about this when I was watching this video of this violinist. So there's this girl who's, she was about, I think, 10 or 12 years old. She's a violinist. And I was thinking, these little kids are so good at violin. And I was like, it's really interesting how good they are with violin. But there's one separator I've always noticed with child prodigy musicians compared to experienced musicians is their ability to be musical. And what does that mean? So with musicality, it has to do with your phrasing. It has to do with the mental picture that you have with your music. The ability to be able to actually tell a story with the music. The kids are great. They can do perfect, fingerings and things, and they can also do all the crazy technique. Well, the techniques that they have the ability to do, and they can play perfect notes.
Yeah.
But their musicality is always, you can really notice it a lot of times when there's slow parts of the piece. They don't really have a direction. So they kind of meander.
I see. So their technicality prowess is above their tonality. Like they don't really.
Well, tonality is a musical term, so I don't want to really say that, but it's got to do with their musicality. Yeah. They don't have that kind of soul to the music.
Yeah.
Like, this is why Michael Jackson was a big deal when he was a kid, because he was a kid who had like that soul part of the music as well as the technical gift. So he kind of was like a freak of nature because, people are like, how does a kid like this do this without life experience?
Yeah.
And, that is the biggest separator, I think, between adult musicians and child musicians. Like, a child musician can be technically way better than a lot of adults.
Yeah.
Like, that little 12-year-old girl that I saw was like, she's way better than me technically. But she still is lacking in that musicality because she doesn't have the life experience.
Yeah.
So that is, to me, a perfect analogy for the separator between intelligence and wisdom. Wisdom is earned through experience, but the problem with humanity is, how do you increase experience when you would need 1,000 lifetimes to be able to comprehend the true path towards being able to go from playing with sticks to being able to split an atom? Yeah. You see, so it's almost an impossible problem.
We hope that's the case through history, but right, you need a well-educated populace. You need to have that wisdom, right?
But a well-educated populace is still.
But that's the only way to transfer wisdom and experience of past generations to future generations. If the future generations need to be educated to a level where they're able to appreciate the experience that our forefathers have lived. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Otherwise,
it's so hard to pass wisdom, though. I feel like, because even when you hear the morsel of wisdom, a lot of times you cannot digest it. Like guys like Jordan Pederson will say, like, clean your room.
Yeah.
And to me, that's such a prominent piece of wisdom that it can't be digested unless you understand what that actually means. Because people will just say, clean your room. Like, what's the wisdom in that?
Yeah, your mom tells you that.
Yeah. But if you take that piece it's such a profound piece of wisdom if you can internalize it. He's basically saying that you need to set yourself in order to be able to extend yourself out into the world. So you need to have your own shit together before you can take care of anybody else.
Sure.
And that's such an important piece of wisdom, and you can't really internalize it just by hearing it. You have to actually experience it and actually go through fucking up to be able to usually ingest that. You know what I mean? So how do you internalize wisdom, even if you were told and passed down this wisdom? We have ages and tons of stories and things that perfectly encapsulate a piece of wisdom, but people cannot digest it.
But maybe this goes more to an important thing. Why did it take somebody like Jordan Pederson to speak, to make sense of that? Because it's something, it's wisdom that is passed down. That wisdom of clean your room is passed down from your parents, but your parents say it as, clean up your mess. There's a saying in Hispanic culture that's like, you don't even know how to wipe your own ass.
Yeah.
Like, so why talk to me like
right?
Why,
You're below me.
Yeah, well, why learn how to wipe your own ass and then you can go out.
Yeah.
Then you can be an adult.
Right.
Like, then that's something
that's wisdom.
That is wisdom. Like they say it, it's a funny phrase, but it's kind of like this thing where it's like, you really, I guess maybe you really have to internalize it and think through it. But maybe
because as a kid you just think, my parents are just telling me to clean my room because there's just something they make me do.
Yeah.
They just don't want to. They just want to not have mess for some reason. You don't really.
Yeah.
When my parents tell me to clean up the room, it's just like, to me, I never even internalize a reasoning behind why they did it. I was just like, it's just a chore to do. It's just something for them to make me to do because they just make me do things.
Well, maybe we're living life robbed of meaning. Maybe we're living life without philosophy, right? Maybe we're not giving ourselves or our younger generations enough credit to hold on to these or weigh in on these things, because I think if we teach philosophy at a almost from the ground up in ethics and how we approach things, I think maybe because we sort of do that, right? We lay the foundation. Don't hit other people. Don't do that kind of stuff, right? Like, golden rule, that kind of shit. We lay a base foundation that I think everyone can understand, but there's very little meaning in like, saying, hey, organize your life before you go out and try to do these bigger things or try to, like no one really says that. But it's because I think it goes back to education. I think if you had a well-educated populace, you might have some of that trickle down, and people would have more of, how do you say it? More of an understanding of the world around them and the consequences of those things.
You're saying if they basically learn philosophy at a younger age?
I think so. I think that's something that's really important. I don't know. What do you think, Joe?
Well, there's a couple things I wanted to say.
Yeah, go ahead.
But directly to your point, I think Terrence was trying to say, let's bring light to the distinction between intelligence and wisdom, right? So there are many people that are well educated and not wise at all, and there are people who you wouldn't think much of, who have a lot of insight into the world. But
talk to anybody who's lived on the streets. They're
right.
Well, a lot of people can be just like tons of wisdom.
Yeah. Yeah, but I guess perhaps one definition of intelligence that could be useful is learning from other people's mistakes, right? So rather than having to go through it yourself, you can you could build a mental model in your head with your intellect to kind of apply that to your own life. So maybe perhaps education could be useful in that endeavor. But I just wanted to go back to your definition of wisdom. The only issue I see with this definition in terms of the twin nuclei problem is, how do you get a body of experience when any thing you do could mean the end of civilization as we know it.
What do you? Can you clarify that a little bit?
Right. So, like, if we're defining wisdom as you need experience of learning from your past mistakes, if we're talking about the atom bomb here,
there's no room for a past mistake.
Exactly. So how is there room for people to grow wise about these topics?
That's the scary thing.
Well, they should look at things like Hiroshima, right? Or like things like this.
Yeah, so there are past mistakes, right? They're
on a smaller scale.
Yeah.
I mean, to those people, it's a massive thing, but in the scope of the world, right? Like we all kind of, I mean, that's why I think the United Nations is formed. It could be wrong, but to kind of avoid situations where, you know, the whole world is at war again. You know, we want to avoid that at all costs, right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't stop somebody like what Weinstein was saying. That doesn't stop him from vehemently being against someone like Trump, where they're not fit for holding the nuclear codes.
Right. Like, just to be able to have a guy, like he was saying, with that kind of temperament as the head of an entire of the leading first world nation is just, that it just shows us that's a perfect example of just how far behind in wisdom humanity is, as a whole. Just like, for that to even be a thing is absolutely insane. Like, that should not happen in the 21st century.
But the thing is that there's people that voted for this knowing well his character. And
right, which demonstrates a lack of wisdom.
Yeah.
And probably also lack of intelligence. So it's probably a combination of the two, but yeah, it's really, there's a major lack of wisdom there. Because the thing is, you can see the patterns of his behavior in systems that have existed before. And this is the kind of thing that Joe was saying you can learn from previous example, right? That's how we can gain wisdom. We can see an example of this and then correct our behavior or prevent ourselves from even going down that path. And with guys with Trump's disposition or temperament have existed throughout all of time, you know? So we've seen that kind of pattern, and yet we still tend to repeat it.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
It's just like, how do we ever get out of this cycle?
How do you transfer wisdom?
Yeah. How do we get out of these deadly, you know, these potentially world-ending scenarios?
I mean, there's a lot of ways to approach it. It's kind of a chaotic system, so you have to... I mean, there's multiple ways you can attack it, right? Like, education is one of them, because you need to increase the intelligence of your populace so that they can filter information properly and see what's real and, well, what's likely a false source, or what's likely to be a questionable source, or, you know, be skeptical of things like that, or be skeptical of people like snake oil salesman, like someone like or populists like Trump. And then also learning from history, right? Like you need to see these things. You need to know that waves of populism have come through, to avoid. I mean, to look back and say, oh, this is a resurgence because, you know, people feel like their national identity is being attacked or whatever, for whatever reason. There's a horde of foreign nationals that are taking over, and you know, this is an example in history. You can go to history books, and this has been laid out. This has been happening sort of cyclically when these situations arise, when you know, you have influx of immigration, blah blah blah. Yeah, and it's nothing new under the sun, right? And then but this is why, I mean, for me personally, I think education is like the one way you got to do it. But when you get cuts in education and shit, you know, you just...
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think from my estimation, the problem is our incentive structures. There's not enough incentive for being cautious about things, right? So, like, I guess this is why these existential risks are so problematic, and it's so frustrating to talk about them. Like, when it comes to AI or nuclear armaments or, you know, whatever, people kind of just brush it off and just say, you know, oh, whatever, you know, they just don't think about it. And like for the AI case, for example, they say, oh, it's not going to be coming around for, you know, 50 years. So why are you even talking about it? When in the scheme of things, 50 years kind of, if you're thinking long term enough, to figure out these really difficult questions is perhaps not even enough.
Yeah.
Right? And
it feels like that's like a race against time.
Yeah, exactly. And the problem is we have these incentive structures for AI. Like, for instance, I have like a friend who works for like Wall Street, and he's trying to develop a learning algorithm, like an AI basically, to try to predict the market. The incentive there is clear, right? Like, you can become, if your AI works,
insanely rich.
You could become one of the richest people in the world.
Yeah.
Right. The reason his AI has failed is because there's always things going on behind the scenes that a computer can't predict.
Exactly.
Like, some trait, like a human can know some traits going on that's before it goes even public, and you can act on that information, which a computer can't predict. But the problem is that incentive is there in the first place, is that you can become incredibly wealthy, or like for nuclear power, like developing these nuclear bombs suddenly puts your country on the map, and suddenly you become a threat where you have like a bargaining chip at the table to like try and hold the world hostage or something.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's not enough incentives for the world to try and slow down and actually think carefully about these things. And there's no mechanism that we have as a society to try to promote these ways of thinking.
Right. That actually is a good follow-up to kind of what I was talking with Juan a long time ago, is we need to develop some kind of system where you can predict these technologies and their implications. So you need some kind of way. So I was thinking of like maybe it's some kind of regulating body or something, where once these technological innovations are coming to market, you have to pass some kind of committee where you have a detailed layout of the existential risks that this thing can have, and then how you have to combat them over the course of some long scale period of time.
Well, can I just say this?
Yeah.
I think fundamentally this comes down to politics, right? Like I mean, because like these agencies can be politicized. So I mean,
that's true.
Fundamentally, I think we need to restructure. It sucks because you need to almost overhaul the system and the incentives within the system, because there would be incentives to say, especially to cartoonishly with Republican sort of people in office, they kind of buddy up to industry, and then they say, hey, we'll let your technology pass if you just pay us some money.
That's true.
And
politics ruins everything.
Well, that's the problem. We would need an overhaul on the incentives we have in society, the incentives we have within our institution, and to kind of put the right incentives in, right?
Yeah.
Because like what you're saying like we have incentives even for the robot thing. We try to create we try to create a market that's essentially free in theory, right? We try to like block people from releasing inside information, or so if somebody has inside information, we try to like make that illegal. Like you go to prison for that because we don't want you fucking up the market.
Yeah.
Right. Which is kind of an oxymoron, but yeah, like it's a free market thing.
Right.
But yeah, it's like you try to play fair, right?
Yeah.
But I don't think our political structures have that necessarily. I think we need to overhaul the incentive structures of our society in general.
Yeah.
To accomplish these kind of things. But yeah, I can see why people like Weinstein.
They actually mentioned in the podcast.
Yeah. Get to that level of like existentialist crisis.
Yeah.
Because it feels like you have so much to overcome, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a big
tough
problem.
Yeah.
It's a big problem.
It's very tough. It's a very hard problem to fix, I think.
Yeah.
Because we want to keep our capitalist incentive structures, I think, because that promotes entrepreneurs and businesses to grow, But yeah, that capitalistic incentive is kind of what is one of the factors, at least, that kind of goes against that prevention of these kind of big problems with our,
you try to develop your own private nuke. you know, yeah. I mean, it's rough. It's rough. But
Pull a Dr. Evil.
yeah.
Lyrics core. $100 million.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, man.
Yeah.
I definitely he was definitely morose. He had like such a.
What does that mean?
He was just like. He seemed so depressed talking about this. At that point, it took a somber tone. And it was kind of like, man, okay, this guy's really feeling it. He really feels the weight.
Can we give a hats off to how good Weinstein is at explaining shit? I feel like that guy is like, he fucking refines the shit out of his statements. I'm like, damn, dude.
But you can tell that
that's the level I want to be at.
But you can tell that he talks a lot because he's able to just have a fluid flow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Him and Pederson are like some of the best guys at condensing their sentences, I feel like. They're just so good at cutting all of the bullshit out.
Trimming the fat.
And just making it one solid piece of sentence that's just like says the maximum impact. Yeah, I'm
wisdom,
like,
bro.
Yeah, I know. They're so fucking good at it. I'm like, damn.
I don't know. But yeah, So Joe, what else? You came on here. You wanted to
Joe's
talk
the
about
one with the notes here.
Yeah, I know.
You got notes too. I don't know if we even touched what you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, we touched one of the things. I had some other things like some more physicsy stuff, but I don't know.
Oh wait! Can I tell you guys something about wisdom and truth?
Yeah.
Okay.
So here's the thing. There was like a chat of this boy and this girl, and this girl says, "Do you think I'm pretty?" It's like a 11-year-old, 10-year-old. She asks her 10-year-old. They're both the same age, little kids having crushes on each other, and she's like, "Do I look pretty to you?" And the boy says, "Not really, but I still love you." And then I was like, and then she's like, "Oh, okay." And then I was like, "Well, see, this is the difference between like knowing when to tell the truth and then having wisdom." Because the wisdom part comes from not hurting people's feelings. You don't want to hurt people's feelings. And then the truth, I mean, if you want to be a slave to the truth, you just tell the truth,
Arguably, I'd say that little boy has massive wisdom with that statement.
No. If you don't want to hurt people's feelings,
But she accepted it. He told her the truth.
No, I think, yeah, it's.
I'm with the little kid on this one. I'm sorry.
No, I think.
Yeah, but to Juan's point, there are some truths that shouldn't be shared, right?
Yeah. There's
That's not one of them.
You can't lie to a
that
kid.
That little pimp, he can continue strong.
But yeah, this was like a good segue to whatever any other points you guys wanted to have or highlight.
Well, I mean, it was more like the only issues I took with the Weinstein podcast was there was a lot of rhetoric when it came to like culture issues, and we did
expand on that.
Well, so like about SJWs and about having
like Andy No and all that stuff he was talking about.
Yeah, in that section of the podcast, right?
What was that you had a particular issue with?
Well, so there was a lot of stuff. So I'm just bringing it up because I don't know if you guys are interested in talking about it. But,
yeah. I think it's actually smarter to revolve it around maybe your topics, Joe, since you're our special guest and you kind of had this prepared.
Okay. Well,
we'll continue it there.
Prepared. It's just I had time to think about it.
Sure.
So,
yeah.
Like,
let's go down that trail.
One of the most interesting things to tackle might be the Jordan Pederson argument that he kind of rehashed. So, like, for instance, he said something along the lines, I'm paraphrasing, that men can't be bothered to work with relatives, kin work, I think is what he called it.
Yeah.
And he says they're just hyper-focused on careers.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And basically he was suggesting that men are just more intrinsically interested in their careers, and women are more intrinsically interested in people.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was trying to use this as like evidence against structural oppression. He was basically arguing that structural oppression might not be as big an issue as people tend to make it out to be. And so it's just the pieces of evidence that he gave were kind of not satisfactory to me. Like this specific one, so men are more career hyper-focused. So why do you think that is? And just I want to get your opinion on this, but like, so my answer is that, you know, it could be the case that there are inherent biological differences between men and women. That can certainly be a factor, and it might have some weighting in terms of where you end up. But at the same time, it is also an undeniable fact that that's also a product of structural oppression, right? That, like, it's a product of the structure itself. So it's like, you can't tell me that parents don't treat their daughters and sons differently in terms of their expectations of like where you're going to end up,
right?
You know, what they want you to do for like your living or whatever. Like, I know many people in my life many women in my life whose parents told them, you know, don't worry about finding a job, just find a nice man, he'll take care of you, whatever. You know, this kind of old guard way of thinking that I think can't be understated in terms of how it's
impactful
exactly of where people end up. So I guess I'd like to,
and just to kind of back your point up, I it was interesting listening to him, because I only listened for a couple parts of the podcast, but he did bring that up, and he when he was talking about relationships between men and women and stuff, I was a little bit kind of like taken aback. I didn't know if he was joking or because some of the takes were just, I was like, really? Like, you have that opinion? And like for that, I was a little bit kind of like, okay, because I like to think that I'm impartial, and it's hard to be objective, really. It really is. But because I come within this topic with my own biases, but there are very strong arguments for socializing behavior, like that enforce roles within genders, right? Yeah, there's some innate tendencies, right? For boys can be more aggressive because they have like testosterone and stuff, and they're probably more willing to play rough or more rough. But then there's also little girls who are socialized to just be like, no, don't play with the boys' toys. Play with your dolls, you know, and stuff like that. And I jokingly said this a long time ago to one of my friends. I was like, you know, if you want to blame gender roles on someone, blame it on women, because. But I jokingly said that because there were studies done on how mothers raise their children, and because. Once again, this comes to like, it's so cyclical, right? Because it's like you tell mothers to raise children, and then, you know, and some mothers, I think, feel more like men are stupid and they shouldn't raise children. You know, I think so. I think there's some. Let's be real. There's a little bit of interplay here where it's like some women think, you know, these are my children. The man can sort of stay away, and I'll teach them the things that they need to know. And then there's a couple relationships where, you know, but it's a teamwork kind of thing. But the studies that I saw, that I don't remember the names, it was such a long time ago, it was pointing at how mothers sort of reinforce these gender roles within their household. It's actually more women enforce gender roles for daughters than for boys. For boys, they just tell them, you know, they don't really tell them to express themselves. They don't really tell them to vocalize their feelings more. You know, they kind of just let them operate independently and have them be a little bit more, independent. So I don't know if that study is held up because there's a lot of new information that comes out, and, you know, they refine things, and things are constantly being updated and everything. But it was probably the most powerful case for socialization in our society, and how we reinforce certain roles, and then how we voluntarily slip into roles because we want to fit into a role in our society, right? We want to fit into an image. I think that's intrinsic.
I think generally what I like to do is I like to just ignore social mostly. I find social, trying to study things socially, I try to cut that away most of the time, because I like to analyze things from, I like to analyze things from first principles, as fundamental of a level as I possibly can. And for humans, that fundamental level is going to be biology. And just from what I've seen from my own life experience, my own channel, is that I think the biology is the main driving force. I think we give a lot more credit to social things and these kind of higher level frontal lobe processes than they actually really deserve, because I think in the end, biology wins 99% of the time. I think we can try to fight our nature, and think that things are going to be some different way, and you can do that to some degree, but I think ultimately our gender roles and all these things are driven by biology. So I think they're pretty
but this is
natural to occur.
We've gone to this there's always an interplay, because I think biology feeds from society and society feeds into biology, because we sexually select traits and behaviors. So if you believe in evolution, then it's a two-way street. We feed into biology and biology feeds back. So like you cannot take a one-way street approach to this, I think, because you have to concede that throughout evolution, there are certain traits that have been sexually selected to be advantageous over others, which means that society did play a role, meaning people somewhere down along the line, our ancestors selected certain things because they thought they were better for whatever reason, right? Phenologically, or phenotypically, or whatever, like for some reason intelligence was a good trait to have. Could very well not have been. You know what I'm saying? Like we could have been like apes.
It's gonna be our demise. I can tell you that.
We could have been apes, but it would have been we wouldn't. You know what I'm saying? Like it's
but apparently not wisdom.
yeah.
Well, you can't manufacture. You can't breed wisdom, unfortunately. Yeah.
But the thing is, like it's I say women sexually select because in most societies, I think, I think, and a lot. It's funny because in the animal kingdom, I think a lot of females do the selection.
Yeah. I think
females are the ultimate selectors.
But I think that's where the biological framework comes in, because then as you go deeper into the root of human evolution, you get to lower levels of primal behaviors, right, where things are entrenched and genetically dug in. And I think that's where you're coming from. You're saying, hey, these, you can't remove the foundation. You can't. It's hard to go backwards in evolution. I mean, you can. Evolution doesn't mean it's, we can revert back to things if they're advantageous. We could go back to being brutes if there's a nuclear holocaust and like the strongest win. That kind of thing. Could easily go back to that.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I just find when there's like these things where we're talking about gender differences and people are confused, like why do women do this or men do this? For me, I've always found that the solutions that make the most sense to me are biological. Okay. So I've not had much issue, I don't think, with understanding a system when I understand it or when I analyze it from a biological framework. So I find it to be the most valuable.
Yeah. Can I jump
system.
in here? I'd like to pitch a case study to you then, because on one of my podcasts that has yet to be uploaded, we probe the differences between astronomy and physics. And so I think that's an interesting case study because in physics, we were talking at the start of the podcast about the differences, about underrepresented minorities in physics. So I've done research on the statistics and stuff like that. So, for instance, women in physics, like the percentage of faculty members that are women in physics is 16%.
Of worldwide or U.S.?
I think this is worldwide. It didn't specify it to U.S. At some points, it did specify U.S. This is from American Institute of Physics, though, so it could be just U.S. strictly. But
it's probably less worldwide. Let's be honest.
Yeah,
we're the most progressive. We're the most progressive nation probably on Earth. So I would say,
yeah, I guess that's true.
But for us, maybe I'm thinking like 20 or 30%.
Well, I mean, he just gave you the numbers, bro.
Yes, but I'm saying like in America, my intuitive value would be like 20 or 30%, but I don't know. Maybe that's wrong.
Right.
Who knows?
It was 16%, and the number of the percentage of PhDs
was way higher.
No, it was about the same.
Really?
In physics, it was basically exactly.
Oh yeah, I guess that's true.
That's
true.
16%.
Okay.
But when you transition to astronomy, you notice that the percentage of women who get PhDs is about 40%.
Mm.
And so to me, the question I posed to the audience and my guest was, why do you think there's this distinction? Because to me, like, astronomy is a very closely related field to physics. You need a lot of physics to do astronomy.
Yeah.
So if it is strictly biology that's determining this difference in physics between the sexes, why do we not see that in astronomy? How do you reconcile?
I've definitely noticed there's cooler people in astronomy. Like, it seems to be the sexier physics.
There's a lot more chill people there.
A lot more normal people. Like, I feel like it breeds people who have a little bit less ego in astronomy. So maybe that has something to do with it, because perhaps there's some more. There's a more social component. I mean, I could see that. It seems like the cooler people I've noticed anecdotally are in astronomy.
I don't know if cool is a scientific term for, like, being rigorous.
This is my rigorous definition.
My hypothesis: more women in astronomy. It's just a cooler field.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's a great question. Yeah, I would say. I mean, if you're saying, like, you're Terrence, you know, if you look at purely at a biological framework, it might be because, you know, actually within the biological framework, I can't really speak on that. I'll let you speak on that. I can speak on the socialization factor, which is, it might be what you brought up, what you kind of teased at, but it might be that astronomy it's a little bit more of a relaxed atmosphere. I don't know that, but it might be that there's not as an imposing thing in astronomy where it's like, I can't think of a theoretical astronomer that's like, you know, like where professors are kind of just like, you know, you don't look like an astronomer, you know, that kind of thing. Because I think with astronomy, you can be your
normal human.
You can be a hobbyist astronomer and be really good at it. And I think I can see why it might be a little bit more approachable, because I think with traditional physics, there's a lot more gatekeeping. There's a lot. You have to go through the training of mathematics. You have to do all these
we got to do that for astronomy too.
Yeah, you do. But I think there's a lot more gatekeep or like a red guard where it's like, no, you don't really look like a physicist or something. You know, there might be a selection. Is that what that was said? Selection bias.
Yeah.
Of like seeing who looks like a physicist and who doesn't. And maybe that's not like, and that's more of a socialization thing. Your people are not taking women seriously, where it's like, you don't really look like a physicist, you know. And admittedly, I've had moments where I'm like, wow, she's a physicist. You know what I mean? Like, it's cool. But I'm pretty sure
good.
But I'm sure physicists. But I'm sure
that's messed up.
I'm sure people have had that same reaction with me. Like, I'm not, you know. But that's a good thing. That's a good thing. You want to increase the scope of what it means to be.
Yeah. I think I'm just thinking that astronomy is kind of like, it has a lot more ability to be a social physics, because I feel like with astronomy, people know kind of what you do. If you go out in the public and you say, I'm an astronomer, people say, oh, you deal with the stars, and you know, you kind of have this rapport with people instantly. Mm-hmm. But then if you go on the field and say, I'm a condensed matter physicist, people are like, what the fuck does that even mean? So I feel like astronomy is like, it's rife with more of that human aspect. So like, Joe, you were just talking about with the whole Pederson thing, and also the Weinstein approaches, which I tend to agree with, is it's got more of a personability. It's got more of a human aspect to it, where people can still come into it who are interested in people. Like when I had the astronomy club at my school, there were people in there who were from like business. You know, there were people in there from all different kinds of areas of the school, and it was the one club that we had in the physics department where you had interdisciplinary people who weren't just sciences in there, because people understand what astronomy is. They can see the stars outside, so you have more of an ability to connect with people, I think, in that realm of physics than you do any other one. Well, because there's just more of an attachment to real life that people can understand immediately.
Yeah. Well, so what I would say is that is directly a social interpretation, right? I would say the reason it is more people science. You're not studying people. You're studying stars. You're studying exoplanets. Very complicated phenomena in space, which I think are just as real world applicable in physics, high energy physics, condensed matter physics. Like you could see, I wouldn't say that astronomy intrinsically is a people subject.
Right.
I would say that that is a byproduct of, outreach, having role models, of all these social implications. That would be
I see what you mean.
My analysis of the situation.
I see. So yeah, you might be right there.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some kind of social part of that where it makes it more friendly for women to be in.
Exactly.
So you're saying essentially if you could capture that in, let's say, condensed matter physics,
Yeah.
then it could reach potentially the same level.
Yeah. So I'm tempted to think it's not a biological thing. It's these social aspects that have been exploited in astronomy and not elsewhere.
Sure, maybe you're right.
Yeah. And I mean, I think you're right. Like it just has to do with how I think it's made to be more approachable because you don't necessarily, you can look up at a star and be in awe, or you can look up at Saturn's rings and be in awe. You don't need a complicated equation. Yeah, like if you wanted to get into the details and be a better astronomer, you would need that.
Well, you have to be in math to be an astronomer.
Yeah, to be a real
Let's not
astronomer,
make
you would
it
need that.
Confusing for the audience. Like you have to do a high level amount of
Yeah.
physics to be an astronomer.
You would. That's what I'm saying. If you
And
wanted
mathematics.
To, but if you liked it as a child and you had someone who gave you that route of like mentorship and was able to develop that interest in you, to be at a higher level, you necessarily need to go to the math, and you just say fuck it. It's an option. The math is something I need, and you just do that. As opposed to other things like, nobody really gives a shit about. I mean, like, you can show kids magnets and shit, but...
What are you trying to say, Juan? That's our field, bro.
I know, but I'm saying you can show kids magnets and stuff, but then when you...
It's not as cool as a planet, right?
Yeah.
Like a fucking planet.
Graphene on my scarf.
Yeah. Exactly, yeah. It's like, okay, cool, yeah. All right, well then you learn about the magnets and, magnets are real simple, actually. It's just this and that, and you're like, okay. But there's nothing like the sense of awe, right? You don't have, you just don't have that really in other fields, which is unfortunate. Unless you went to the CERN, maybe that might have an impact on you. Safe.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I could keep going, but I'd like to invite you to bring up whatever.
Well, I think we are actually cutting close on time, pretty much. So I think we need to wrap it up.
We have one more topic.
Well, the thing is, our camera might
really?
not last us, right? It's only, I think, an hour and a half or something.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so I don't want to
Shit,
push
you
it.
would know that. I would know.
Yeah.
What about
We could, of course, pause maybe or something.
take a
but I don't
pause for
know.
the cause?
I don't know if you want to. You can maybe check, see what time's on that camera real quick, because I think it's going to be on
We'll
that
edit
one.
this out.
Every time you say that, you never do.
24 minutes?
Well, it just keeps counting up, actually. What the fuck?
Yeah, because it's broken up in sections.
Oh.
There should be a large number, though, that tells the full time. Is there not?
No.
Oh.
Wah, wah, wah.
Okay, well, I guess if the camera cuts out, then we'll just have you on the rest. Because this one has like 5 hours of camera time.
Okay.
So, yeah.
I think we have time for one or two more topics.
Okay, yeah. So my other topic was about the geometry in physics.
Yeah, that was.
So I wanted to nerd it out a little bit.
Yeah.
And I wanted to just see, let's go down a little bit of the philosophy of physics rabbit hole.
The portal.
Yeah, the portal. So Eric Weinstein has his new podcast, The Portal. It's like #1 on some media platform he showed, and he doesn't have a single episode.
Yeah, no, I checked it out. It's got a 2-minute introduction, and it's got like 400 5-star ratings.
Right.
Like, wow, man.
It must be nice, Eric.
Yeah.
But he has The Portal coming out, and he was talking about. So the people who are familiar with Eric Weinstein, he's a gauge theorist, and he's been on Joe Rogan's podcast talking about gauge theory at one point.
Yeah.
And I never really even knew what the study of gauge theory was, in its rigor.
From my understanding, gauge theory is physicists try to gauge how well they are at theoretical physics.
But thank you, Juan.
Yeah. I don't know. Look, this has been brought up, but it's gauge theory is a little bit. You get into like groups and you get into like supergroups and shit and Lie algebras and
I don't think it's very layman friendly.
It's definitely not.
But but basically, a lot of gauge theory has to do with using geometry and combining it to describe particle interactions. So, for example, a particle interaction would be like how two electrons interact with each other, or how two protons interact, or something. And we have a field of physics that normal physicists like me, Juan, and Joe kind of can study, is called quantum field theory. Although I think none of us have actually gone through quantum field theory yet.
Not yet.
Quantum field theory has relations with gauge. What is it called? Gauge
theory.
Gauge theory.
Yeah.
And quantum field theory is like a combination of classical field theory, which we know, quantum mechanics, which we know, and special relativity, which we know. So it combines all three of those really deep topics of physics, and you can use gauge symmetries and things to describe those. So long story short, after this diatribe, basically I was curious to see what you guys thought of the fundamental nature of geometry to describe fundamental physics. Do you think that's the end all be all? Do you think that's the lowest level? Like, what do you, or just any takes on it? What do you think about geometry and physics?
Okay, well, I don't have much of a hot take, so I'll just tell you whatever comes into my brain. But I think it's a really interesting idea, right? I think it's a pretty compelling thought, because he did bring up the motivation, right? Is you have geometry in quantum field theory, which describes theory of particles, right? And then you also have Riemannian geometry for as you mentioned, relativity. So it does seem like a very important mathematical framework for interpreting things. And it's pretty enticing, the idea, but in general, I don't know what to think about his overall claim or his thesis or whatever, because it's not very well documented and I can't really research it in depth. But I mean, string theory, I guess I would say, is a competing theory of everything, and also kind of relies on geometry, right? It's basically, instead of treating point particles as a point, right, at some point you get like the most indivisible unit in like traditional physics is a point, but in string theory those become like vibrating strings,
quantized strings.
Exactly, right. Yeah. So then you're inserting some geometry to avoid like singularities, like where you divide by zero in layman explanation. So I would say that is also on some level like a theory of geometry. So maybe there's something there, but I'd really have to get into the details to be convinced.
I mean, there is fundamentally, I think we see that a lot, right? So in relativity, right, even a surface level dissection of how we're introduced, at least with relativity, is always calculating the whatchamacallit, I'm blanking on the name.
The metric?
No. Well, yeah, you have the metric, but that then you include tensors and stuff. But I'm saying the simple example we're given is we start with a geometric layout, right? And then you draw the paths that light takes, and then you start seeing, you start relating the distance between the 2 points where light hits, like the barnyard example, right? And then you can Google this or go to Wikipedia and see the barnyard example for like relativity. But from these examples, you get to these, from geometry, mostly geometry, right? You get to these contradictions almost. And then you're like, okay, then I have to rethink about my geometry. So this is geometry that kind of leads you to something new. So it's like fundamentally, like geometry is built into some things in our physics. Even they don't explicitly say this, but when you guys know which examples I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Which ones? You mean in the relativity you're talking about?
Do you
The
remember
barnyard
that
I
one?
thought was something to do with length contraction.
Yeah, but that involves the geometry because then you draw lines to where
Oh,
your
I see what
object
you're
should
saying.
be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
There should be lines shouldn't intersect, that kind of thing.
Okay.
So fundamentally, you start at this base level of geometry and stuff. And there's a couple other things. I asked my friend, central forces, because he's a mathematician, and I was like, central forces, it's always 1 over r to the n, right? Whatever number that is. And I was like, has anybody studied inverse space or whatever? See what's in that, because it's something that we see a lot in. It's a cat. It's something that we see a lot in physics, but no one ever really. I mean, it's probably not that interesting, but it's just something that we see a lot. We see 1 over r, and it's the inverse relation, right? And he was like, I don't know, but once again, it comes down to geometry. You can probably expand on that more and more. So a lot of it is.
Oh Jesus, the cat's gone crazy.
Okay, get out of
She's
here.
on the fritz.
But yeah, it's just like can you guys think of other examples that we use like geometry in
Well, the thing
our
is,
approach?
I was trying to think of how geometry plays on the fundamental level, and I'm not really convinced that it's our fundamental thing. So I looked up some things. There's this geometry called the amplituhedron. I don't know if you guys heard about this. This is something that was developed in 2013. It was developed by Nima Arkani Hamed. He's one of these theoretical guys. I think he was big in the the Large Hadron Collider situation. And another guy, I forget his name. He's got a weird last name like Trinka or something. Has no vowels except for the A. But yeah, they developed this geometry called the amplituhedron. It's this trippy looking shape that describes particle interactions for a specific case within quantum field theory. It's got like a dimensionality of 4 or something. And yeah, it's like you keep seeing these weird geometry things show up in these fundamental areas of physics. But I'm always like, I wonder how fundamental it is, because, well, I don't know, because geometry has to do with space, right? So if you're thinking about geometries, that means you're always thinking about space. So then to me, that seems like if geometry is fundamental, that means also somehow space is fundamental. But maybe it's not, because maybe the thing is, I'm not far enough like in Weinstein to really see these deep connections. So I have a lot of questions more than answers, because the amplituhedron, I don't really know if it's a spatial kind of description, or if this is like a purely abstract description where we put something in an abstract space,
Right.
and then the interactions are described with that abstraction, that geometrical abstraction.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to know what they mean by geometry as fundamental.
Well, so I have an intuition about this. I am not a particle theorist, so I can't claim a real fundamental knowledge about these things, but I could do my best to try to explain how I think it operates. So it just has to do with the field concept, right? So like you could describe gravity through, like you were describing, the metric, right? How you choose to represent your space, right? 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional space.
Right.
Right.
So it takes account of the dimensionality and also the curvature of space.
Yeah.
For the layman.
Yeah, exactly. And so then if you were to try to describe the fundamental forces, you do that with the field concept. And so this is a little technical, so I'll do my best to explain it, but it's like sometimes when you have an electron, you think that electron has an electric field, right? It creates an electric field around it. It has some sphere of influence, people might say. An alternative interpretation of that is that there is a single electric field to the whole universe, and then that electron causes a perturbation in that field, right? So in this space of
Well, the electron itself doesn't cause perturbation. What causes the perturbation? Is it the electron itself? Or do you not know?
well,
You're saying in this field,
Right.
Because it's
in this
supposed to
field
be
model.
like the whole thing concept of field theory, right? Is you're saying there's a field that permeates space,
Yes.
but then an excitation actually creates that electron.
yes,
Okay.
yeah, right, okay. or vice versa. I'm saying it the other way, but I mean, maybe there's a distinction there. But to me, right now, it's a distinction without a difference. But anyway, so this electron could be an excitation of that field, right? And so that's a warping of that space, of that field, right? And you could do the same of all the other fundamental forces, like the strong and weak force, right? So in this aspect, you could describe all of these fundamental forces with geometry, with how you're choosing to describe the metric or the field. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how they are described with geometry still, though. Because the force itself, like what exactly would be describing what would the particle interactions are described with geometry, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what about that is described with geometry? I don't understand. And it might be too deep for the podcast, I think.
Yeah.
I think it might be something that we'd have to explore mathematically.
Yeah. That's right.
But yeah.
To me, I think there's basically, to sum it up, I think there's something there. I think it's an interesting idea.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it's very technical. And
Yeah.
seeing how we go about being convinced is...
I think to talk more broadly on what his idea, right? So his idea was that geometry plays a bigger role, like it's more fundamental
Yeah.
in the physics, and like I think he's kind of fucked because he should have released a manuscript.
He can still release
draft.
it.
He can, but
I
the
don't know
thing
why
is,
he was complaining about that though. I'm like, dude, this is how it works. You
I mean,
got to
it's
release proof.
part of the science is collaboration, right? And he brought up the fact that he kind of got fucked
Yeah, but
because
get
his
over it.
dissertation did work on some of these things where, he speaks on it, but I'm not going to take his words. But yeah, like some of the he developed something, or he developed at least a question about what we should investigate more closely, and sure enough, huge developments came from this inquiry, and he feels some type of way about it, right? So I can see his apprehension, but to be honest, the whole point of science is to collaborate and discuss things. And yeah, there is some elitism. There's a fact that, I mean, I see this every day, like, smaller institutions suffer from bigger institutions because bigger institutions have more resources. They have more access to labor, and like, because they have more students, they're able to support bigger groups, then are therefore able to specialize and churn out papers like that, like almost overnight, almost. So yeah, it's, and they get a lot more attention, and they get a lot more favorable attention because they're from, Princeton, MIT, that kind of thing, just because they have those names next to them. While other institutions, they might have competing theories, but they're not paid any attention because, well, they're not interesting. They're not interesting institutions. They're not big name institutions, that kind of thing. Anyway, that's beside the point. What I want to say is his theory. He should just come out with the manuscript.
Mm-hmm.
So we can really start, the community can start really digesting his thoughts. I think he's afraid of being criticized for his ideas.
Yeah, he's I don't know why he's complaining like people are going to sabotage him. It's like the thing with writing a paper is now you have a name attached to your ideas, right?
Yeah.
Like someone can't take your name away.
Yeah.
So I don't know why he's saying like he doesn't trust academia. It's like, yeah, if you don't trust academia, then release the paper yourself as a single author, because
You can publish it on the archives.
yeah,
Yeah,
because
anybody can
then
publish
then you have the proof attached to your name.
Yeah.
So I didn't really understand. I guess what I was thinking maybe he was trying to say was he was looking for maybe some help or some ideas to generate from that, or maybe some excitement to generate from that, but didn't want people to take his full idea maybe.
No, but the point
I
is,
don't know.
you look, even if he published and he was wrong, he would still be cited as the originator of the thought.
Exactly.
It doesn't matter if somebody corrects your shit.
Right.
Yeah.
So I like Weinstein, but I didn't understand what the hell he was doing. I'm like, dude, you know the process. I mean,
does
he's a
he? I
smart
don't
guy.
know.
I believe all the shit that he's saying, But I kind of am agreeing a little bit with the article that Sean Carroll's Rife wrote him about. They got played. I'm like, they didn't get played, but it's just like, release a goddamn paper if you're gonna, you know.
I agree. I agree with Sean Carroll's wife. Like, it's the way she said it was kind of like, you know,
but who cares?
Kind of elitist. It's kind of elitist, but but she made a point.
Yeah,
like, you know, and
if you're gonna, he knows what the game is. If you're gonna be a rigorous scientist and you want people who are rigorous to help you along your journey, then you got to go through the channels. That's the whole
a lot of it's put up or shut up. A lot of it's put up or shut up, right? Like you have to go through the review process. You have to go through you have to see what people have to say about your work.
Exactly.
And maybe they have good points. Maybe they see a hole in your logic, and then you're able to correct it. You know,
right?
Like
if he wants to hold a seminar on hearsay, then, you know, hold one for Eddie Bravo and Joe Rogan. You know, I mean, what do you want? Like,
I mean, like it's like the whole thing with Fermat's last theorem. The guy that he was saying, right? He was like, this guy worked for 7 years on proving Fermat's last theorem. He came out.
What was his name? Wiles.
Yeah. I don't know. Well, he basically he was wrong, and then he corrected it. Yeah, he was wrong-ish, and he corrected it, and that was it. And then he still got credit for the work.
Yep.
You know?
Yeah, it's very simple.
But he developed whole new fucking... Literally, he had to develop multiple sort of subsects within math just to try to answer this. You know? He yeah, it's like, dude... You're still going to get credit for it. Like, you developed all these tools just to solve this one problem, and those have developed their own studies. Like, that develops into its own discipline.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think he's being a baby.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, just to say, like, I do agree with both of you that if you want this idea to be taken seriously and you're going to go to the trouble of bringing it up on the podcast and trying to talk about it, you should publish it. But to give him some credit and show some empathy, like, my whole gripe with my podcast is I see, like, instances of, like, his story, like we talked about at the beginning, happening all over the place, where people get discouraged or they get kind of more or less steamrolled and shoved out of science, and this kind of comes from an emotional place, right? Not a logical place. It comes from feeling like you're not good enough, or people saying like, oh, your work is garbage or whatever. So, like, anyways, I could understand why he's mistrustful of the system after, you know, his work didn't receive credit and then it turned out to be really important. But anyways, so yeah, I agree. I think he should publish it because there's no way we could say it's right or wrong until he does something like that.
Yeah,
I agree. And on that note, I think we need to wrap it up.
Yeah, we do.
We don't want the whole audio purged.
Yeah, any last thoughts? Any last comments?
I just say check out the Eric Weinstein podcast.
Yeah.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel. If you made it this far, we fucking love you.
Yeah.
Make sure to follow the Twitter at Eigenbros. Make sure to follow Joe's podcast, Beyond the Physics.
Yeah.
Follow his Twitter as well, Beyond the Physic. And yeah, guys, I think that's it. Joe, it's been great to have you, man. We appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, man.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
Appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure.
For sure. All right, and with that, we're signing off.
I don't hear anything.
I don't know what that means to play us out. What does that mean?
That's a massive delay.
To end the show?